Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
So Eruvin Daf Mem finishes the discussion about malacha that was performed by a goy for a Jew on Yom Tov, and the question of whether or not another Jew was allowed to use that malacha, or if he has to wait until enough time has passed after Yom Tov so that he's not benefiting from the goy's activity. The Gemara then refers back to the Mishnah and discusses the halacha of whether or not you mention Rosh Chodesh as part of the Rosh Hashanah service, and this will continue into the discussion of whether you mention Rosh Chodesh at all on Shabbos or during the week. Which tefillas do you mention Rosh Chodesh? Do you have a bracha for Rosh Chodesh? What type of mentioning do you have in Shemoneh Esrei? And a number of other related halachos, such as do you mention Shechiyanu on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, and things of which were said in the yeshiva of Rav Huna. So, where it begins, we had just said that it was forbidden for a Jew to use malacha that was performed by a guy Yom Tov until enough time has passed after Yom Tov that malacha could have been performed by the Jew himself, and therefore he's not benefiting from the fact that the guy did it at all. The Gemara has two incidents related to this. The Gemara, first of all, says that there was a bunch of turnips which came to the city of Mechuzah. A guy brought it, and the guy wanted to sell it, and there was Yom Tov, and the Jews wanted to know if they're allowed to buy it right away. So Rava went and he checked, and he saw they were dried out. So he said like this: there's two potential issues. First of all, maybe the guy picked it on Yom Tov. Second of all, maybe the guy brought it from outside the Tchum. The guy certainly brought it from outside the Tchum on Yom Tov. Those are the two malachas. So he says the fact that it's dried out means it wasn't picked on Yom Tov, so you don't have to worry about that. As far as coming from outside the Tchum, there the halacha is that it's only forbidden if the guy brought it for a Jew and only for that Jew. But here the guy didn't bring it for a Jew at all, he brought it to sell in the market. It's not considered to be bringing it for a Jew, and therefore he said it's permitted. Later he saw that the goyim who sell turnips were bringing tons and tons of turnips to the town, and he realized that's because they were planning on selling it to the Jews, and therefore he forbade Jews from buying it until after enough time had passed after Yom Tov, so that they wouldn't benefit from the activity of the guy. That's the first story. Second story is that there were a bunch of Jews. Their job was that they set up chuppahs, and they like to braid hadas branches. And there was a guy who would cut the hadas branches and give it to them, but he cut it on Yom Tov. So Ravina said, you're allowed to smell the hadasim on Yom Tov. You don't have to wait until after Yom Tov and the time that you would normally have to wait. You don't have to do that. So Gemara says that Rava Bar Tachlifa said, why not? You should make exera. You should say that if you allow them to smell it on Yom Tov, what's going to end up happening is that they're going to be mizalzel, they'll be cheap with all the other halachas of Yom Tov. So you shouldn't allow them to do this. So the Gemara says that Rav Shmaya asked, I don't understand you two. You're worried about them being cheap with the halachas. This is a straight up halacha over here. Nobody should be allowed to smell this on Yom Tov. It was picked on Yom Tov by a guy for a Jew. What's your head there? And the Gemara says that Rava agreed. Rava said, you're right, they have to wait until enough time has passed for it to be picked and brought after Yom Tov. Now, what was going on over here? What was the issue? So the Rishonim explained it was the second day of Yom Tov, and it was in Chutz La'aretz, and it was the time, it was in the era where they had a calendar already. So the second day of Yom Tov was just really a zecher, and therefore Ravina wanted to paskin that you don't have to be concerned about the halacha of a guy doing malacha on the second day. Yom Tov, you should be allowed to use it. On that day, asked the people to be mezalzel, and that they said, yes, we should be machmer on the halachos of a guy doing malacha even on the second day of Yom Tov. Okay, we now refer back to the Mishnah. We had seen a halacha brought by Rabbi Zoisa. He said that the chazan on Rosh Hashanah should say two things. First of all, he should say that if today is Rosh Hashanah, then I'm mentioning Rosh Hashanah for today, and if it's tomorrow, then it shouldn't be today, then I'm not saying for today, and then tomorrow you should say either for today or for yesterday, meaning you should make it tonight, which day is referring to. And the second thing it said was that you should mention Rosh Chodesh. So the Chachamim, the Mishnah says, did not agree to him. So the Gemara wants to say this should be a proof for a question we had asked. The question was, do you mention Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah or not? Rosh Hashanah is also Rosh Chodesh, but should the fact that you're mentioning Rosh Hashanah also include Rosh Chodesh naturally? If it's the beginning of the year, it's obviously the beginning of a month. Or do you specifically say this is Rosh Hashanah and this is Rosh Chodesh? After all, there are two separate carbon musafs that we bring, one for Rosh Hashanah, one for Rosh Chodesh, so maybe we should mention each one separately in our Shemoneh Esrei. And what it says, we can figure it out because we see that the Rabbanan didn't agree to Rabbi Daisa. Obviously, they felt that Rabbi Daisa was saying you should say Rosh Chodesh. We shouldn't say Rosh Chodesh. The Gemara says, no, that's not what they didn't agree about. They had no problem with the Rosh Chodesh part. They didn't want people to be mentioning today or maybe tomorrow, today or maybe yesterday. They didn't like that tonight. And the proof is that the Mishnah says that Rabbi Daisa said this for every Rosh Chodesh of the year, where we didn't know which day was Rosh Chodesh necessarily. The first day we kept him, maybe it would turn out being the second day. We didn't know. Still, the Chachamim weren't invited him. They didn't agree. So, you see, obviously, it's nothing to do with mentioning Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah. The issue was that they didn't like the fact that he was making it tonight. So Gemara says, but your pshat also doesn't make sense, because if the thing that they didn't agree about was the making of the Tanai, why do they have to say that halacha on Rosh Hashanah and on Rosh Chodesh? Say it on one, and then I'll know. So Gemara says we had to, because Rosh Hashanah is more logical that there would be a problem with it, because if you're going to say maybe today, maybe tomorrow, people will end up doing malacha. Rosh Chodesh, you say maybe today, maybe tomorrow. What's the big deal? So there is no Isser Malacha on Rosh Chodesh. But Rosh Hashanah, there's an Isser Malacha. The Chachamim could have a problem with that. So I want to say this is why I need both cases, to show that even where there's a concern of people doing Malacha, still Rabbi Daisa says you should say it. And even on Rosh Chodesh, where there's no concern, still the Rabbanan disagree and say you should not say it. The issue is not just the fact that people might come to do Malacha. The Gemara now wants to work more deeply on the question of whether or not you mention Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah. Now let's just clarify the issue over here. Mentioning Rosh Chodesh is as follows. There are three ways you could possibly include or not include Rosh Chodesh in your tefillas. The lowest level would be if you just say Yalav Yavai. That's not a bracha. It's not being mentioned in a bracha. It's part of either Hoida'ah, thanking Hashem, or it's part of Bakasha, asking Hashem for things. But it's not a bracha. A next level up from that would be mentioning it included in another bracha. The bracha about the day, which we're mentioning either Shabbos or Rosh Hashanah, whatever it is, we could also throw in a phrase about Rosh Hashanah in there as well. Higher level than that would be to give Rosh Chodesh its own bracha. We'd have an additional bracha added to the Shemoneh Esrei, and Rosh Chodesh would get its own. Gemara wants to know which one do you do for Rosh Chodesh, and the question will apply to Rosh Hashanah, and the question will apply to Shabbos. Now, during the week, let's keep in mind, we don't give Rosh Hashanah, we do not give Rosh Chodesh its own bracha. Rosh Chodesh is, we just say Yala V'Yavai. We don't say a special Kedushas Hayayim bracha for Rosh Chodesh during the week at all. The only thing that we do say is Musaf. Musaf gives Rosh Chodesh its own bracha, and the reason is because it was a special carbon Musaf on Rosh Chodesh. That's therefore more of a reason why even on Shabbos and on Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Chodesh should get its own bracha for Musaf, but not necessarily for the other tefillas. So the Gemara says as follows: the Machlokes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, how many brachas you say in Shemoneh Esrei of Rosh Hashanah? According to Beis Hillel, you say 9 brachas. 3 for Kedushas Hashem, that's the beginning, the first 3. 3 for Haidah, that's the last 3. And in the middle you have Malchus, Achonis, and Shofars, altogether is 9, and Kedushas Yom is included in Malchus. So Beis Hillel says you don't add anything special for Rosh Chodesh, you don't add anything special even for Shabbos. Specifically, he's referring to when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, you don't add anything special. 9 brachas, that's it. Says Beis Shammai, if it's Shabbos, then you add a 10th bracha, because you have a separate bracha for Shabbos. Shabbos is not included in the Rosh Hashanah Kedushas Hayayim bracha. Shabbos gets its own bracha. So the Gemara asks, I don't understand. If you're adding separate brachas for each day, so add for Rosh Chodesh also. If you're adding for Shabbos, it gets its own bracha. So Rosh Hashanah should also, so Rosh Chodesh should also get its own bracha, and you should end up with 11 brachas. Every Rosh Hashanah is also Rosh Chodesh. So Gemara answers, Gemara says Shabbos is different than Rosh Chodesh. Shabbos gets its own bracha in all Shemoneh Esreis. Ma'ariv, Mincha, Shachris, Musaf, it gets its own bracha. You say a bracha Kedushas Yom for Shabbos. Rosh Chodesh doesn't get a bracha. Rosh Chodesh just says Yalav Yavai. Even during the week, Rosh Chodesh doesn't get a bracha. Therefore, we're not going to add a special bracha for Rosh Chodesh in its Rosh Hashanah Tefillah. Shabbos we will, because Shabbos gets its own bracha. Rosh Chodesh we won't. And therefore, you only say 10 brachas when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos. You have an extra one for Shabbos, but not one for Rosh Chodesh. Now, the Gemara goes further and says, even the idea of even mentioning Rosh Chodesh as part of another bracha of Kedushas Hayayim, let alone not giving it its own bracha, even mentioning it, that's also Machlokes Tanaim. The Gemara quotes a brisa. We have first the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer and the Tanna Kama, who say that you don't mention Rosh Chodesh except for Musaf. You don't mention Rosh Chodesh at all. Musaf on Shabbos we're referring to here, or Musaf during the week. You don't have to mention Rosh Chodesh at all. You don't even include it in another bracha. You don't mention it in a bracha at all. What you do is you say Yalav Yavai. You say that today is Rosh Chodesh. Their machlokes is, do you say it as part of Hoidah, which would be in Moedim, like where we have Al Hanisim, or do you say it in Ritzei? So that's part of something you're asking Hashem for a special siyata d'shmaya. That's a machlokes between them. But they all agree that it doesn't get a bracha. It's not even included in a bracha. You just mention it without a bracha. The Gemara says, however, Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, they hold, no, you do mention it in a bracha on Shabbos. You would say, you would add in v'yom shchodesh hazeh in the middle of the bracha. Not in the bracha in the beginning, not in the bracha at the end, but you would mention it in the bracha of Kedushas HaYom. It wouldn't get its own bracha, and it wouldn't even be part of the bracha formula. It would just be in the middle of the bracha in there somewhere. Now, what actually is the halacha here? When it says, Rav Chizda says you don't mention Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah, just mentioning Rosh Hashanah automatically indicates that it's Rosh Chodesh. You don't have to do anything more specific than that. And Rabbah agrees with that halacha as well. Now the Gemara continues with some other halachas that Rabbah said he learned that was discussed in the yeshiva of Rav Huna, and they didn't come out with a final answer. And the first discussion about Rosh Chodesh was also that, so this is another one on the list. And the question is, do you say Shehechiyanu on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur or not? What's the issue? Well, on the one hand, it comes once a year, and if it's a rare event, and something which is a rare event, you should say Shechianu. On the other hand, it's not a regel. You only really say Shechianu on a regel, one of the Shalosh Regalim. It's not one of the Shalosh Regalim, it's one of the Yom Roim. So this question was asked in Yeshiva of Rav Huna, we didn't have an answer. Then he says, when I went to learn in Rav Yehuda's Yeshiva, there he had an answer. He answered, he said, of course you say Shechianu. I say Shechianu even when I eat a squash that I haven't even seen all year because it's been out of season, something as small as a squash. So for sure, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur comes once in a while, you would say Shechianu. It doesn't have to be a regel. So the Gemara says, no, I understand that you could say Shechianu if it makes you happy. And my question is, are you obligated to say Shechianu? That's the issue that I wasn't sure about. So Gemara says, Rav and Shmuel said, you only say Shechianu on Shalosh Regalim, not on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And the Gemara has a kasha now from a series of drushes made on a pasuk in Koheles. The pasuk says, Tein chelik l'shiva v'gam l'shmayna. Give a piece to 7 and also to 8. What's 7? What's 8? So a few explanations. Rabbi Eliezer says 7 is the 7 days of creation, 6 of creation and the 1 of creating Shabbos. And 8 refers to the 8 days of Milah. Give a special mention, recognition, bracha to that. Rabbi Yeshua says no. 7 is the 7 days of Pesach. 8 is the 8 days of Sukkot combined with Shmini Atzeres. That's 8 days. Now, what does the word V'gam include? That includes Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur. So you see, we're including Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur for a bracha. What bracha? Obviously Shechianu. Where says no, not necessarily Shechianu. It could be the bracha of Kedushas HaYom, that you're saying a bracha in Yishmon Esrei to bless the day, thank Hashem for the day. Lav dafka, not necessarily does it refer to Shechianu. So Gemara says, in fact, it can't be referring to Shechianu because it says you can say Shechianu all 7 days or all 8 days of the other ones. It says whatever bracha we are referring to, you could say all 7 days or all 8 days. We said l'shiva l'shmayna, the 7 and the 8 days, but Shechianu you can only say the first day. So Gemara says, no, he holds like the opinion that you could say Shechianu all 8 days, all 7 days. If you missed it the first day, you could make it up any time during the Yom Tov. So Gemara says, but what do you mean? Shechianu can only be said over a cup of wine. They don't have a cup of wine the rest of the days. Gemara says he means to say, if you happen to have a cup of wine, then you could say the bracha. But it doesn't necessarily prove that he holds like the opinion that says you could say Shechianu without a cup of wine. Gemara says, what do you mean? You're right, it could be that he's referring to where you happen to have a cup of wine and he holds that you need it, but you can't say that because obviously if he says you make a Shechianu, if he says you make a Shechianu on Yom Kippur, he doesn't hold you need a cup of wine to say Shechianu, because on Yom Kippur, what would you do with a cup of wine? You can't say the Shechianu before Yom Kippur and then drink it, because from when you say Shechianu, you're already Makabel Yantif. What else could you do? Say it and leave the cup alone? You can't. You got to drink it if you said Shechianu on it. What should you do? Give it to a child to drink? That you can't do either. You're not allowed to give a child food to eat on Yom Kippur. That's teaching him to do Isurim. We don't want him to end up being stuck with that. Okay, what was the end of the story? What was the halach over here? So the Gemara says that the Rabbanan sent Rav Yemar to go sit by Rav Chizda and see what he's going to do on Erev Yom Kippur. And he came and Rav Chizda chapped right away what he was there for. And he said, I see if they moved a wet, heavy piece of wood, it's for a reason. So he sat down and he took a cup of wine and he made a Shechianu. It was Erev Rosh Hashanah, not Erev Yom Kippur. And the halacha actually is, the Gemara says, that you say Shechenu on Rosh Hashanah, you say Shechenu on Yom Kippur, and you could say it without a cup of wine. Even walking in the street, you need to say Shechenu. You could say Shechenu.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.